Hey everyone, welcome to the channel The Formula for Success and Wealth, where you'll learn how to build assets and live with financial intelligence. There's a quiet belief we've all been taught since childhood, that if you work hard enough, you'll have the same opportunities as anyone else. But what if I told you that was never true? That while you were scraping together coins to pay for college or splitting snacks with your siblings, someone right next to you already had a down payment on their first home before even graduating high school. Today's topic will expose the real gap between those who barely get by and those who begin life several steps ahead, generational wealth, and why, even when two people make the same salary, some seem to be playing an entirely different game. Spoiler alert, they are. If this already struck a nerve in less than a minute, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what's coming next might show you a side of the story no one else ever dared to. For this month's topic, I'd like to introduce you to two women, Mel and Sophia. They're both 40 years old, married, and both work in the publishing industry. As you probably know if you've ever watched a romantic comedy, women only work in publishing, journalism, or art galleries. On the surface, Mel and Sophia's lives seem almost identical. They work for competing publishing companies with similar salaries and job titles. However, one of them faces much more challenges than the other. Let's begin with Mel. At 40, she's still repaying her student loans. She carefully plans every purchase just to stash away a few $100s a month for retirement. She deals with lingering health issues from untreated medical problems in her youth, things like joint pain and dental issues. She carries a modest amount of credit card debt. She and her husband alternate picking up their child from kindergarten to avoid paying for after-school care. After years of unpredictable rent increases, they managed to land a rent-controlled apartment, a real lifeline, since buying property in their city is completely out of reach for their family. At the desk next to hers is Sophia, who, despite earning about the same and holding a similar role, lives in a completely different reality. She has no student debt. She enjoys going out with friends at least once a week and shops whenever she feels like it. She's healthy and active for her age, with no major medical concerns. She has zero credit card debt and regularly earns miles and perks with cards she pays off in full every month. She and her husband employ a nanny who picks up and cares for their child every day after school. They live in what she calls a modest 3-bedroom, 2-story apartment they moved into right after their wedding. If these two women with such similar careers, salaries, and ages live such different lives, what explains that disparity? Sure, luck plays a role, but in the case of Mel, Sophia, and millions like them, the real explanation lies in generational wealth. Before we go any further, a quick word from today's sponsor, Betterment. It's tax season, and I know that's probably the last thing you want to think about right now. But if there's one way to save and invest sustainably over time, it's making the process as easy and stress-free as possible. None of us need another full-time job just to manage our money, especially when we're already working over 40 hours a week. That's where Betterment comes in. Their automated investment tools make your money work for you while you focus on literally anything else. Once you set up recurring deposits, they take care of the rest, building and managing a diversified portfolio so you can get on with your life. Saving and investing shouldn't feel like another burden. With Betterment, it's your money doing the work. Head to betterment.com TFD or click the link in the description to get started in minutes. Generational wealth isn't just about passing down cash, property, or stock portfolios. It also shows up in less visible ways. In your body, your mind, your surroundings, your network. It's important to say that generational wealth isn't inherently a bad thing. No one chooses the family they're born into. No one picks their parents, or whether they'll be in a position to help with a down payment. For many families, giving that kind of help is the ultimate dream, seeing their children better off than they were. In this community, where so many come to learn about money and improve their financial well-being, one of the main motivations is making sure your children don't go through the same struggles. But when it comes to extreme levels of wealth, yes, we absolutely should be talking about higher taxes, and we'll get into that later. Even so, generational wealth, while not immoral, is deeply unfair. And the way it continues to influence our adult lives long after we've moved out of our childhood homes quietly tricks us into thinking we're all playing by the same rules. But we're not even on the same playing field. Some of us aren't even playing the same sport. To understand how Mel and Sophia ended up in such different places, despite literally working side by side at the same company with the same income, we have to go back to the beginning. Mel grew up in a working-class household in upstate New York. She only attended public schools, most of them underfunded. Even so, she graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA and completed the only 2 advanced classes available. She did 2 years at a community college before transferring to a respected state university, where she earned her degree. That's also where she met her husband, who comes from a similar background. Today, they're finally able to make consistent contributions to their retirement accounts, a major goal they've worked toward for years. But between student loans, credit card debt, and childcare costs, there's little left to save at the end of the month. When things got tough, they occasionally had to rely on credit cards beyond what they could repay, trapping them in small cycles of consumer debt. As the main earner in her family, Mel also sends money to her parents every month to help cover their basic expenses. If you see your own story in what we've said so far, don't wait. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Every video we post is a real chance to shift the way you view and manage your money. And honestly, you can't afford to ignore that anymore. Sophia's path was the complete opposite. She grew up in Westchester, one of New York's wealthiest suburbs. She went to elite prep schools and also graduated with a 3.8 GPA. But her schools were packed with advanced classes, extracurriculars, and resources. She was on the fencing team, edited the school newspaper, helped run the yearbook committee, and spent summers at an exclusive 8-week camp in New Hampshire. Thanks to a mix of academic performance, activities, and family connections, she got into Brown University, where she also joined the fencing team. That's where she met her future husband, someone from another wealthy family. Her parents gave them the down payment for their apartment as a wedding gift, so mortgage payments were always manageable. They both have investments that go far beyond their maxed-out retirement accounts. And when she racked up some credit card debt in her 20s, her parents paid it off, interest-free. While she gradually reimbursed them, she'll never have to worry about paying for her parents' retirement or medical care. Her upbringing paved the way for a life where every step was made easier. Mel and Sophia may be equally qualified in terms of education, talent, and work ethic, but the paths they walk were carved by very different forces, and generational wealth shaped almost every one of those steps. From who you marry to where you live, it all connects. Considering that Sophia studied at an Ivy League university and married someone also from an influential family, it is quite likely that her current position at the publishing company, a notoriously competitive sector, was achieved, at least in part, through family connections or, at the very least, the possibility of working unpaid for some time. Mel, even if she managed to land a similar internship, probably had to balance it with several jobs at once. When we compare Mel's and Sophia's lives, we see that even at 40 years old, their housing conditions are still deeply different. This makes perfect sense if we remember what we discussed in Chapter 4 about how inherited wealth is completely distorting access to housing for the rest of the population. Many of you sent me a New York Magazine article that talks exactly about this generational and economic divide in cities like New York, where there is a chasm between those who can sustain independent adult life and those who cannot. And I can say from personal experience, owning a property here, without coming from a millionaire family, but with enough financial privilege to afford a significant down payment, that entering the real estate market nowadays largely requires someone to support you. With housing prices becoming increasingly unaffordable in practically every part of the country, the gap between those who can buy a simple house and those who cannot grows every year, because more buyers depend on parental help to enter the market. This means fewer people can buy property without family support. In 2023, about 38% of first-time homebuyers under 30 needed financial gifts or inheritances to cover their down payment, which highlights younger generations' dependence on their parents. And this is not exclusive to the US. In Canada, since 2015, the number of first-time buyers receiving family support rose from 20% to 31%. Although the rate has recently stabilized, it has not decreased. Nearly half of buyers needing parental help to buy a home is an absurd scenario. I know that immersed in this capitalist system, we end up thinking this is normal, or rather maybe we don't think it's normal but accept it resignedly. Yet these statistics a few decades ago would have been unthinkable. In the past, housing costs were somewhat related to people's incomes. It was common for a family to buy a home with a single salary, and often that salary didn't even come from someone with higher education or an office job. Today, nearly half of people need access to some inherited wealth to own a home. It's surreal, and this doesn't even take into account the huge increase in all-cash deals, especially in highly competitive markets like New York. In April, 64% of Manhattan sales were paid entirely in cash. This is almost double the average for large US cities, around 39%, and much more than just 2 years ago. This trend largely happens because of sky-high mortgage rates, which lead buyers to prefer using their own savings instead of borrowing from banks. Also, with the scarcity of properties and high demand, buyers do everything to stand out, including promising immediate payment in cash. This is terrible for the housing market because in practice, it means only the very rich or those with liquidity can buy properties. And for young adults dreaming of owning a home, this huge down payment will only be possible with money from their parents. I know people whose parents literally gave them 7-figure checks to buy a house in New York, which, of course, is an enormous privilege. If my parents offered me a check for over $1 million, would I have the political conviction to refuse and say thanks, but I prefer to fight on my own? Probably not. I would likely accept it too. Still, it's shocking to know some people go out for lunch and their parents just say, "Here's $1 million." That's the reality in much of New York, especially Manhattan. It's important to understand that owning a home doesn't just bring benefits at the moment of purchase. Despite the risks involved, owning property guarantees huge advantages. At the federal level, much of the public housing subsidies go to homeowners through the mortgage interest deduction, a benefit that costs about $30 billion per year, which equals spending on rental vouchers and far exceeds federal investments. In public housing or new rentals, more than 90% of this benefit goes to families earning over $100,000 annually. The program disproportionately favors white families, given the low homeownership rates among minorities in New York, and also benefits city residents less. And as we've discussed, buying a property is insanely more expensive than before. Data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis shows that, adjusted for inflation, 2022 was the most expensive year to buy a home since 1963. That year, the average price was $19,600, which would be equivalent to $196,000 in 2023. By comparison, The current average is $550 to $600. The housing discussion also brings us back to the difference between Mel and Sophia when we talk about adulthood and caring for parents. For many low-income Americans, their home is their only asset. Many baby boomers who bought homes at low prices have no other savings for retirement. They have medical expenses, debts, and many costs that end up falling on adult children. Children who, if they were wealthier, probably wouldn't have to worry about this. For these elderly people, the home is their only real wealth. So keeping property prices high and ensuring absurd profits on sales isn't just advantageous, it's the difference between being able to retire or not. Even if your parents aren't dependent on you today, the fact that so many older Americans depend on an inflated market affects their children who cannot afford to buy a home. In short, the most effective way to buy a property today in many places is by asking for help directly from parents. And if we analyze another difference between Sophia and Mel, we see the issue of childcare costs. This leads us to the last point. When did childcare become as expensive as rent? Even without having kids or intending to have any, I clearly see how stark the difference is between those who can count on parents to care for children and those who cannot. Even if it's not the same as handing over a check, offering free or partially subsidized care in 2025 is practically the same as giving a scholarship. Because the current cost of childcare is completely unfeasible. The pandemic worsened this, but prices had already been rising for decades. According to Business Insider's analysis, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services considers childcare affordable if it consumes less than 7% of family income. Yet almost 2/3 of parents, including 95% of low-income ones, spend well above that. Only 2% of counties analyzed meet this threshold. In other words, according to the government itself, childcare is inaccessible in 98% of the country's counties, and as in other areas, the problem is so severe only because wages haven't kept up with productivity growth. And our politicians seem completely out of touch. The current Vice President J.D. Vance said a possible solution would be to ask grandparents, uncles and aunts to help more. Even though that's not my case, I find this proposal offensive and disconnected. Because, let's face it, most of these people also need to work. The families who most need help with childcare are precisely those who have the fewest relatives available. And if they do, those people are unlikely to work full-time for free. And as someone who has worked as a full-time professional caregiver, I can assure you, it's a job that requires immense sacrifices. And even if the answer was, live with family and everyone helps, spoiler, no one can buy homes anymore without inheritance. And if they have inheritance, they probably aren't worried about childcare costs. For women like Mel, who even being the main income source of the household are struggling, relying on wealthy relatives is out of the question. In fact, she's the one who needs to help others. In my case, I'm not financially responsible for my family, but I send a monthly amount to my mother so she can care for my grandmother. It's not much, maybe $100 or $200 a month, but it helps with some expenses, and I've always taken that into account when choosing careers, jobs, and decisions. I wanted to be able to support my parents if they needed it, not to mention many people don't even live near family, especially like Mel, who moved to New York for work. Building community and support networks is essential, and maybe deep down, JD truly believed that's what he was signaling. But I doubt it. I can't fully trust someone who applies eyeliner like that. And when your own village is already struggling to take care of itself, it can't serve as the stable foundation you actually need. And if you're thinking childcare is tough but it's just a few years, then they'll go to public school. Let's not forget that public school, depending on where you live in this country, can vary wildly in quality and is deeply tied to the local wealth of the area. Preschool and daycare have a profound influence on the long-term path of a child. So even those early years are part of the generational wealth conveyor belt. Attending preschool, whether private or public, has been shown to increase a child's chances of graduating high school on time and going to college. Decades of research and numerous meta-analyses consistently show that early childhood education programs significantly benefit children's early learning and development. Positive outcomes include stronger language skills, better literacy, math, proficiency, improved social and emotional development, and even physical health. Studies also confirm that these benefits extend to bilingual children and those with special needs. Early education is foundational for long-term success, which is why programs like New York's Free 3K and Pre-K are essential. They provide access to education regardless of the parent's income level. And we've brought this up before, but it's worth repeating. The flip side of not being able to afford childcare is often having to take on the responsibility of caring for your aging parents, a burden that primarily falls on people who don't come from generational wealth. Gather any group of friends in any city, and half of them will say something like, "I really hope my parents don't fall while shoveling snow, because if anything at all goes wrong, I'm totally screwed financially. They don't even have enough saved to retire, let alone handle a serious injury or disability. I'll already need to help cover their living expenses, even if they retire completely healthy, let alone if anything happens." And the other half? They're probably thinking something like, "Can't wait for mum and dad to retire so we can go to Italy more often." I know I see people on social media whose parents are constantly jet-setting to Europe with the whole family. And I wonder, is that really what life looks like for some baby boomers in this country? It's just hard to wrap your head around. Because for people without inherited wealth, and especially for folks like Mel who bear significant responsibility for their families, it's not about being taken care of by your parents. It's about having to take care of them eventually. According to a study by MetLife, adult caregivers in the US lose nearly $3 trillion in cumulative wages. For sons, that amounts to an average loss of $283,116 in wages, pensions, and Social Security. For daughters, the number is even higher. They lose an average of $324,044. That's $325,000. It's outrageous. Poor women. Florence Pugh was right in Little Women. Marriage is absolutely an economic arrangement. Don't tell me it's not, it is. You have to marry someone who can help you care for your parents. Now, like with most issues where there's something deeply broken in our economy, and what can we do about it? The solution always points to public policy. We need to fix our estate tax structure, raise marginal tax rates for the wealthiest people, raise wages across the board, boost Social Security, lower childcare costs, and more. Unfortunately, we could have had it all with Bernie, crying in the corner. But we've linked a ton of resources in the description if you want to start getting involved and pushing any of these fronts forward. Because honestly, assuming nothing goes catastrophically wrong, and who even knows anymore, eventually there will be elections again. In the meantime, we have to keep pushing for the kinds of policy changes that can actually address these deep-rooted structural problems. And we have to make it crystal clear that fake economic populism dressed up in culture war nonsense is no substitute for real economic reform. Because not everything was better in the 1950s. As a woman, as an LGBT person, as a person of color, or basically anyone who wasn't a white man, it's obvious that our society failed us in many ways back then. But economically, for working and middle-class folks, many things actually were better. And the future doesn't have to be imaginary. A broader, more inclusive and diverse middle class isn't some pipe dream. We've done it before, at a time when we were a much less efficient and productive society. The challenge now is building That again. And while we fight for that, the most important thing we can do for our daily mental health is to detach from the illusion that generational wealth is normal or inevitable, or that we're somehow failing because we haven't reached the same milestones as people who started with completely different resources, or that we shouldn't be unbelievably proud of how far we've come despite not having those advantages. I didn't realize until recently how much not having generational wealth impacted me, mostly because I used to have a warped definition of what it meant. I thought it meant having a trust fund or treating a job like a hobby that's all profit because you don't need to work. And sure, that's part of it, but it's not the full picture. So to me, that lifestyle always felt like some kind of lottery fantasy. Fun to dream about, but ultimately pointless. Now that I've grown and had deeper conversations with friends, I see that generational wealth can take many forms. Even just having a financially stable upbringing, or knowing you'd have someone to fall back on in a crisis, that's part of it too. Growing up, my childhood felt pretty stable and good, but the economy and cost of living were totally different. Then, if I had the same household income as my parents do now, I wouldn't be able to support 3 kids, own a home, and provide what I had growing up. So now there's this pressure to have a career that outperforms theirs, just to stay in the same place, to keep the same middle-class status, to provide a similar life and future for my kids. It's a heavy pressure, especially when you're hustling constantly and pursuing high-effort careers just to maintain what once felt normal. I'm planning to have kids in a few years, and I know their upbringing will be different. My work actually started in higher education, and now I understand the system in a way I didn't before. One of the things I'm saving for and really focused on is making sure that when we do have kids, I'll be able to spend more time with them, maybe by taking a break from work or going part-time, just to be more present. My mum used to do something similar when we were little. Starting when we were around 4 or 5, she'd give us a small amount of money on shopping trips and let us decide what to buy. We'd have to think about how much it cost, what the tax would be. She taught us about money really early. I want to continue that tradition, but now include what I've learned about financial literacy, investing, saving for big goals, creating habits early. That's going to make a big difference. And when it comes to college, there are also trades, other ways to build wealth that we never heard about growing up. I want my kids to know those options, because when you compare how unequal the playing field is, one person's college education leads to a lifetime of debt, while another barely notices the expense. It's wild how little that's discussed. People without generational wealth are made to feel like they're the rare exception. Highly recommend the Dairy Girls Trust Fund episode, by the way. Just use your trust fund. I do it all the time. I didn't know we had one. Did you? It's a joke, but the reality is most Americans don't have those kinds of resources. And the ones who do aren't the ones shaping the public conversation. So even if elite institutions and the people running them keep gaslighting us, we can at least stop gaslighting ourselves. Generational wealth, I'm being generous here probably, explains 82 to 83% of how people end up where they are as adults. If this video made you feel something, anger, clarity, motivation, don't keep that to yourself. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share it with someone who needs to wake up to this truth. We don't pretend things will magically get better here. We tell it like it is, show the way, and walk it together. And if you want a practical step to start, turning your finances around, check out the Miles course in the description. It might be your first real move toward freedom. See you in the next video.